It's time to talk some New York Mets baseball. Who will be the Mets' starting third baseman? How will the Mets use Brandon Nimmo? Which prospects may come up and make an impact this year? We'll talk with New York Mets play-by-play broadcaster Keith Raad about his story getting to the big leagues, sabermetrics, Mets, and more. Join us for a hometown New York Mets baseball pod coming up next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. We've got a special show today, but first, a couple of quick announcements. ATC Projections was named the #1 most accurate projection system by Fantasy Pros, now for the 5th time in a row. So thank you to the guys over there at Fantasy Pros, and really excited to be #1. And an even bigger announcement, ATC is partnering with RotoWire. That's right, RotoWire. The ATC projections are now live on the site. You can get them with the player pages and more. So you can go on RotoWire for the ATC projections. And, of course, all our other sites, Fangraphs, RotoBaller, CBS Sportsline. ATC is up on everything. Well, anyways, we've got a fantastic show tonight. We are very honored to have the following guest, who's the current play-by-play radio broadcaster for the New York Mets. That's right, our hometown New York Mets. Started working with the ball club last year. Before that, he was the voice of our local Mets affiliate, the Brooklyn Cyclones, for 5 years before that. Grew up out here on Long Island, not too far where I live currently. Welcome to the Beat the Shift podcast, Keith Raad. How are you, Keith?
Hello, gentlemen. Good to talk to you because talking to you guys, baseball is getting closer, which is what I need right now.
Yeah, we're about to turn the page to February. Spring training not far behind, so we're really excited. And, just a little bit of personal stuff about you. Can you just tell the audience, what was your career path that led you to calling games here in Flushing, Queens?
Yeah, so you mentioned that, last year, 2023, was my first year in the major leagues. So that was the culmination of the classic minor league baseball broadcaster route, which is 9 years, cutting my teeth, doing whatever I could, getting as many games as I could, getting as many on-air reps as I could in several different cities for very low pay. So making it to the major leagues last year was just, again, a culmination of hard work through different cities. Dayton, Ohio, where I was there with the Cincinnati Reds affiliate. I was in Texas with the Frisco Rough Riders, the Texas Rangers affiliate. I learned what life was like in independent baseball with the Long Island Ducks. And then the Brooklyn Cyclones, which I actually got to spend many years there. That was really the lone place I spent a very long time. And I went from short season there to high A or advanced A. So I really saw basically every single minor league level except for Triple A. But again, it's kind of the classic route of when you get in this business, there's so many different ways you get to, quote unquote, the top. Look at a guy like Howie Rose, who really didn't do play-by-play till he was about 40. And then he was more of a sports talk guy. And then Gary Cohen was kind of like what I was, which was, living life on the minor league buses, waiting for a shot, waiting for someone to like your tape. And luckily I got that shot.
And what's the transition like working in the minor league to working in the majors? And what would you say what would you say your greatest experience was last year being your first year with the Mets?
So first of all, when I'm talking to a minor league audience, I know I'm talking to the farm director, I'm talking to the parents of the players, and I'm talking to my mother. And then you go to the major leagues, and I'm talking to the farm director, I'm talking to the players' families, and a couple million other people that are listening in. So the audience definitely grows. And when you're doing this job in different places and for different sports, you certainly learn, okay, who is my audience? Am I doing a TV game? Am I doing a radio game? Am I doing a game for 2 teams in Virginia? What are the cultures like? What are the people like? How can I speak their language and tell the proper story? So the first thing you have to do is learn, what does big league coverage sound like? And growing up in New York, growing up a fan of, major broadcasters and hearing how they did it, it was pretty, I guess, not easy, but I understood what they were trying to do, what Gary and Howie are trying to do, how to make a game sound the way it does. And I think that in turn becomes the difference between the minors and the majors. Which in the minors, what does the ballpark smell like? What do the hot dogs, sizzling on the grill smell like? How the top prospect do that day? How does the game sound? Versus, you're doing a New York Mets game. It's, you talk about news of the day. You talk about injuries. You're talking about the league. You're making things sound huge because in New York and in baseball and Major League Baseball, everything sounds big. So it's a little bit different, but in a much, much better way. I certainly love my time in the minors. I definitely miss it a little bit, but I wouldn't trade it for anything right now being in the majors.
And as a follow-up to that, what's it like working with the encyclopedia of the Mets, Howie Rose?
It's intimidating because he knows everything, and it's also amazing. Sometimes I'll lean over to the right in my chair, I'll look left, and I'll look at him, and he'll be in the middle of a story, and he'll name, as he always does, some B-side Mets from 1964 who pitched 3 innings, and that was it. And he has a great story behind it. And I do what everybody else does, which is just sit back and listen and try to fill in where I can to keep the story going. But I really do have kind of an envious position where I'm learning from him and I'm hearing him on a nightly basis. And I've heard the stories off the air too that are amazing. And he just went into the Hall of Fame this year because he basically he was born before the Mets were, and I was born in 1983. And most of our audience was born after the Mets were born. But Howie has lived it all. He's seen it all. And the best part about it is that he tells it all over as many innings as he wants to do during the course of the year.
Now, there's a lot that goes into the broadcast. There's preparation. Wondering what kind of research do you do before ball games, maybe before each game or before each series, and what kind of research do you do prior to the season?
Yeah, so prior to the season, I really harp on the Mets. I mean, we're heading into spring training pretty soon, so I know the main players, the guys that I expect to be on the 26-man roster, maybe a couple depth guys. I'll do more biography stuff on those players, but once the season starts and you're in the day-to-day, it really is, for broadcasters, I know everything there is to know about the Mets, and that morning, hey, we're playing the Philadelphia Phillies for the next 3 games. That day, I will start to learn as much as I can about the Phillies or the Braves or whomever it may be. And that's just the way it is because, every 3 or 4 days, you have to know so much about so many teams. It's so hard to keep up with everything all the time. We read as much as we can. We watch as much quick pitch as we can at night to stay up with it. But the way I research for a series is I'm in love with Fangraphs. I have been for a while, especially when they were doing some minor league statistics that I would look into. I'll look at Fangraphs. I'll look at kind of a team's breakdown. The roster resource is awesome. I will use that to kind of get a feel of what pitchers have been used, especially in the bullpen recently, just to get an idea going into the series. And then Baseball Savant is also incredible. They have those game day matchups, which, first day of a series are awesome. You can kind of see who's hot and who's not, who's having a big year and who's not having a big year. Just those little things help because, again, you need better ways than just kind of seeing your classic, average on-base percentage slugging OPS numbers going into a series because, again, you're diving in and you have to not pretend that you know everything there is to know about them, but there have to be kind of shortcut ways to learn everything you can about a team. And I think those 2 assets are helpful.
Yeah, and I definitely know the guy who runs Roster Resource, Jason Martinez. Yeah, a nice colleague of mine on Fangraphs. Really great stuff that he does. And, this is the Fangraphs podcast, so we do have to talk a little bit about analytics, right? How do you incorporate analytics into your broadcast? I would say, what do you think the value of analytics is in a broadcast? And what would you say is the difference between showing it on TV, where you can see some of the visual with the analytics, and discussing it on a radio broadcast?
Yeah, this is the constant challenge that I face because I am a lover of sabermetrics. Most baseball fans are still learning it. On radio, honestly, guys, it's semi-impossible to really do, explain something justly, and especially now with the pitch clock, you have so few seconds between pitches to really get in a point. On TV, that's where you really should be able to kind of teach the game, because what I've learned, especially this year, is I'm a big fan. When I'm looking at starting pitchers for the night, I love FIP, I love xERA, strikeout rate, walk rate, those kind of things. And it's really hard to explain to an audience of, again, it's all about talking to, who am I talking to? Who is my audience? Radio is a medium that skews a little older than probably the average fan that's watching on TV. And those fans don't really care about FIP or xERA, even though to me that's really kind of what the story of this player or this season is for whomever. So it's difficult. I still have to use those to get ready properly for a game, but I find myself kind of emphasizing certain things and almost de-emphasizing or not even bringing up other things. Like, it's funny. Howie and I and Chris Matchkowski, the immortal Chris Matchkowski, who's been a long time, forever producer of the Mets, as I'm sure you guys know that have listened in, they kind of chuckle at some of the things that I talk about and some of the things that I say, hey, pitcher wins and losses, we know those don't matter anymore, guys, right? And RBIs are like kind of cool, but they don't really tell you the value of a player. They just kind of tell you the situation. And sometimes they look at me like I have 7 heads, and that's okay. But little by little, if I take a little bite, I will throw in a ground ball rate for a pitcher. Offensively, OPS is at least where we're headed and where we're at with the audience, baseball audience. I'm sure you guys know OPS is not a perfect offensive statistic. WRC plus is probably my favorite. I know WOBA's basically the same thing. If I was talking on the radio right now, I'd get a look from Howie, I'd get a look from Mads that kind of said, hey, we've lost our audience. And that's seriously how it is. And I have to respect and honor that, because I'm talking to an everyday listener who may not care about that, even though I really do, because that's the way front offices put teams together and managers put lineups together. So it's a really difficult challenge for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you want to be able to convey the interesting and important points of sabermetrics, but you do have an audience to use. And the question, of course, is how to find exactly the right one. Like we can use K-BB percentage. Maybe that resonates. Stuff plus. Everyone loves all the stuff on Savant, all the StatCast stuff. That of course, always resonates as well. Hey, thoughts on using a catchphrase? I know Gary Cohen had his famous "It's out of here." Wondering if you had any thoughts about doing your own catchphrase, and if you don't, I'd like to offer, when they hit a home run, raise the apple.
So I love that. I love that. Now coming up, I graduated college and went into the minor leagues 2015. So it's about 8-9 years. I was always taught, hey, everybody has a catchphrase. They're all taken. Good luck. Like there really aren't any more catchphrases available to you. So I always learned, and maybe it's a fault because everybody wants to know a catchphrase or what's your home run call, that I was taught, and I grew up in the minor leagues trying to paint the picture differently every single time. The challenge of using different words to describe, how the ball leaves the yard. So, I'll find myself saying it's gone just to kind of punctuate it, or I'll throw in an it's out of here. But usually it's dependent on the situation. And the reason that I kind of learned that was because, there'll be minor league guys out there that, they have a catchphrase, and depending on if the score is, that home run breaks a 1-1 tie in the 9th inning, or it's 10-0 in the 5th, they've got to say that catchphrase. So I just I try to make it as natural as possible, for better or for worse. But who knows? Who knows? I find myself trying to find one here and there that people in different situations, 9th inning, last chance dance, those kind of things. I try to find these little moments to put some stuff together. But home run calls, it's just not it's not in my DNA to stick with one quite yet.
Well, hopefully this year, Howie Rose will be able to say the phrase, put it in the books a lot more often. Oof. But speaking of the Mets this year, they have a new manager. Do you think that they'll have a new philosophy? Will there be a philosophy change in 2024, especially with the new GM as well?
Yeah, so you're talking about Carlos Mendoza, the new manager, and the new president of baseball
David
ops,
Stearns.
David Stearns, yes, who,
Correct.
in my opinion, I was on SNY Baseball Night in New York the other night, and for better or for worse for Mets fans, I said that David Stearns is probably the most important acquisition in the offseason that the Mets have made. I'm extremely excited to see what kind of team he puts on the field, because the way he's valued players in Milwaukee, which is a smaller market where your resources only go so far, they produce basically an average of 86, 87, almost 90 wins a year and a bunch of playoff appearances. And they did it. If you're asked 10 New Yorkers on the street, name 5 Milwaukee Brewers, they can't do it. So I'm really interested to see how he does that. I know that the offseason has not been as star-studded as most Mets fans want, but I kind of want to see these guys do well, because that to me means that whatever model Stearns is using is a good one. But the manager that he selected, he and the rest of the front office selected, Carlos Mendoza. What I've learned about managers, they do so many things, but vibe is huge. I mean, the vibe in the clubhouse it's all personality based. Buck has a vibe. Mendy, as they call him, will have a vibe as well. And that kind of depends on winning. Winning helps. But a manager creates a vibe. And the other thing that he does is he has to talk to the media twice a day, which is very, very difficult. Some are better than others at it. But in New York, you have to be able to kind of bring it twice a day. And that's always the challenge. And when you're winning, it's great. When you're not winning, it's not so fun. So I wish him the best. And he seems like a young, youthful, vibrant personality. And I think the Mets are looking to the future with young, youthful, vibrant players coming from their minor league system to help out this core. And I think that's the idea of the marriage that Stearns and the Mets have in place.
And speaking of David Stearns, he had a press conference earlier this year where they asked about Brandon Nimmo's role after the acquisition of Harrison Bader. He said, "We will see in spring training." What does that mean for Brandon Nimmo? What do you think the plan is after he was just named the second best left fielder in baseball by MLB Network? What do you think he's going to do? Do you think Brandon Nimmo is actually going to lose playing time?
So I am super interested to see what happens with Nimmo, because I think if you take the names off of the players, if you see those models all the time, would you rather pick player A and player B and you just see the numbers defensively? Harrison Bader is a better center fielder on paper than Brandon Nimmo. And that's kind of shocking, because Brandon Nimmo is a very well-paid and awesome center fielder. He makes amazing defensive plays. But I think Stearns, what he proved in Milwaukee was he wants, run prevention is a huge phrase he uses. So, okay, follow the little trail mix and see where you get. I think Harrison Bader will be the everyday center fielder, and I think Brandon Nimmo will be the everyday left fielder, which is kind of interesting because Nimmo is the center fielder. But as soon as that was said and MLB Network is naming best left fielders, I'm going, okay, well, I guess MLB Network is all in on Nimmo playing left field, even though that's not totally set in stone yet. But I don't think it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean Nimmo is any less of a baseball player. He's one of the top offensive players in baseball. He's certainly one of the best, if not the best, offensive player on the Mets, outside of all of Pete Alonso's home runs, of course. But I think it's just using the players that you have, putting them in great situations to help win. And I sometimes think that, he's moving to left field. They don't like him as much. And I think that's the complete opposite. I think they're trying to maximize his value even more.
So let's talk third base for the Mets. Bunch of options we have. Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio on the shelf, so not him. Where do you see the Mets going for their starting third base? Who do you think is going to get the most playing time in the coming year?
To be honest, I think the injury you talked about with Ronnie Mauricio is the biggest one, because he came on late last year, and I think a lot of people were kind of saying out of the side of their mouth, Mauricio, who's naturally a shortstop, played some second base. You put basically a shortstop at third who can hit. That's awesome. And so Mauricio being injured is huge. It's huge for him. It's huge for the future of third base for the Mets, because I personally think if Mauricio had gotten 100 games at third, he could probably solidify himself at that position. And, Brett Beatty was given the keys last year, even though it was a little bit late. He didn't break with the team. He was given the keys, and it ate him up a little bit. His defense was not there, and he knows that. So I know that this offseason he's probably working his tail off to get better at it. But once that defense started to eat him up, the offense took a dip, and he wasn't hitting as near what they expect him to do. And that can be New York in a nutshell right there. If you let things snowball and it takes away from you playing your game, and if things snowball and you can't handle it, that's not good. New Yorkers can see through that right away. And that's, again, the kind of the third difficulty of playing baseball. You have to hit, you have to play defense, and you have to do it in New York under that scrutiny. I don't think Mark Vientos is going to be too much of an answer at third base. I think he's more of a backup first baseman to Pete Alonso. I think the Mets kind of know that, and that's where maybe you see, Joey Wendell picking up some games at third behind Beatty. They'll probably give Vientos 15, 20 games at third. But if I'm the Mets moving forward, I think Brett Beatty, this is not make or break, but we need to see some real improvement this year, because with Lindor at short, and Mauricio's back healthy in 2025, that might be something interesting to look at, is maybe Mauricio is the guy that can settle there.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit trumpets now. One thing we missed at going to the ballpark last year was the sound of that trumpets and Edwin Diaz coming in. ATC projections have Edwin Diaz set to save 32 games this coming year with a 2.7 ERA and a 106 WHIP with a whopping 39% strikeout rate, one of the best in baseball. Question is, do you think that Edwin Diaz can jump right back into his elite form?
My gosh, that's what the model says. That's incredible. And the model basically, it regresses to the mean a little bit, right? I mean,
yes, that is his regression is that.
Wow, 39% K rate.
It was 50% in 2022.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Gosh, yeah. I listen. I missed that. My first year in the major leagues. I'm sitting there excited watching the WBC. He goes down. I looked at my wife with my jaw dropped. That was like everybody went, oh my gosh. And so having him back and having it's a lower body injury, and certainly your entire body, the calculus is you're going to throw hard with every fiber of your being, not just your arm. You need your legs and your power. But I wonder what a year off for the arm, just as far as recovery goes. I'm not going to say he's going to throw 105 miles an hour this year, but I'm very excited to have his energy back. And again, a lot of baseball is vibe and energy, and I know it's wins and losses and it's K rates and save numbers, but it's a feeling. I mean, last year the feeling of having him go down affected the rest of the bullpen. And it sounds like it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Okay, David Robertson's going to be the closer. But really that affected a lot, especially when Mets starters couldn't get through the fourth or the fifth inning. So now that Edwin Diaz is back in his place as one of the elites, if not the elite right now in baseball, now you can actually use the bullpen this year, unlike you were using it last year, where Adam Ottavino is now back with the Mets. Brooks Raley's back again. Phil Bickford and Michael Tonkin and all these guys that now can pitch in situations where they're expected to. It's a trickle-down theory. So if Edwin is back, he's the king. That's his place. Ninth inning belongs to the Mets. It's an 8-inning game. Let's keep it that way. Put the guy in bubble wrap, and let's get him to March 29th against the Brewers so we can keep him healthy and get him back out there. But I'm excited to hear my first trumpets.
Well, you just mentioned a whole bunch of guys in the bullpen. Going into 2024, who do you think is the most underrated player on the Mets right now?
Underrated player. Talk about pitching, or talk about position players, or are you talking about just most underrated?
Either hitter or pitcher going into 2024.
This is underrated. So I would have to think, in my mind, underrated. I'm looking at a lot of these guys on the starting rotation side that were given 1-year deals. Does Severino get back to his Cy Young-esque ways? Is Sean Manaea's stuff that we saw at the end of last year, is that for real? I think it's a lot of those 1-year deal guys that are kind of in prove-it mode because they're already underrated. They're already undervalued. We know what Alvarez is going to do. I don't think that's kind of a surprise to anybody. Obviously, Alonso, McNeil has to perform normally. He underperformed last year. So that's probably my guy. I never really thought about who that would be, but probably a Severino or a Sean Manaea, kind of a prove it. Can you stay at this? For Severino, get back to his old ways, and for Manaea to, he was semi-elite with his sweeper that he picked up last year, picked up some velo. So those would probably be those guys that I would clarify in that.
I'm going to go with Francisco Alvarez, who hit 25 homers last year. 25 homer catchers do not grow on trees, folks. Incredible. And, he has to handle a pitching staff, and I think that this year will be key for him in his development, so that he can sort of maybe less pressure than last year where the Mets were trying to win very quickly. This could be a good year of growth for him in a number of ways. Question for you. There are a number of free agents still remaining out there, and who do you think would be a good fit for the Mets? Would it be a Jordan Montgomery, who's really a starting pitcher who really puts a lot of innings, Mets need some innings in? Or could it be someone like J.D. Martinez, who might be a very good bat to stick at DH, and if the Mets are not going anywhere this year, get a nice haul at the trading deadline for?
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of the puzzle that I think if the Mets were to go in that direction, it would be smart. I mean, you saw the Kansas City Royals do that last year they signed Aroldis Chapman. Well, why would they do that to a one-year deal? Well, they picked up Cole Reagans on the back end because of it and traded him to a contender. So I can see that for that move and that piece. That's interesting. But to be honest with you, I don't think the Mets are going to do a whole lot in free agency. I think that they've proven that with what Billy Epler said when they moved Scherzer and Verlander at the deadline last year. And even though no one wanted to believe it, that's kind of the way they've approached free agency. But if they do go get somebody, I know the bullpen is really where you can kind of change a season. I would love a different look. They have the Mets right now have Brooks Raley, one lefty. Would they spend on Wandy Peralta, a lefty who's out there and a free agent, who's kind of proven that he's been a player of value? But certainly somebody in the bullpen more so than a DH, because I really don't know. I know I've heard this talking point for a while. Well, if you get a DH, they'll still find at bats for guys like Vientos, and I don't know how that's possible. I think they really do want to look at the youth, give them 100 games, give them 110 games, and say go. And if they pass, they pass. If they fail, they fail. But they at least saw what they had for a good chunk of time. I know Mets fans don't want to hear that because the Mets spent $445 million last year and are not going to be doing that in the offseason this year, even though they'll still have the highest payroll in baseball.
And speaking about looking at the youth, which prospects do you think are going to make an impact? Are we going to see a second Acuna at Citi Field this year besides Ronald coming when he was with the Braves? Are we going to see Jet Williams this year, who rocketed up the minor league system? Or are you going to see Drew Gilbert, who also has shown off power in the minors? Or even bring up Mike Vassell, a pitcher? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think immediately, I think Mike Vassell makes an appearance probably before anybody else on that list, just because that's the spot on the depth chart you look at, position players, starters, or relievers, that you have question marks. I mean, the starting rotation for the Mets this year is a lot of one-year deal question marks. We know what Senga can do. Certainly Quintana's excellent. But is Severino going to pitch to a 6 ERA? Is Adrian Hauser going to be able to handle it here? Is Sean Manaea? The list goes on and on. So I think the youth of the Mets, the Mike Vassells, the Dominic Hamels, maybe the Christian Scotts, they might take center stage this year, kind of like Beatty and Vientos and Alvarez did last year. But I do think the next wave after pitchers would be, Drew Gilbert. I expected to start the year in AAA. Again, if Nimmo is your left fielder and Bader's in center, Gilbert provides great defensive glove in center, but maybe can hit better than Bader. That may be where the Mets want to see, hey, do we have something here with Gilbert? Can he be our center fielder of the future? And then maybe Acuna. I mean, that name rings a bell for a lot of Mets fans. They love to have one on their own side that they can see. I don't know if he's going to be the most productive baseball player in the National League for the last few years, but just as long as he's up there and he can provide something, I think that's a lot of excitement for Mets fans. But that's the way I kind of see this rocking in 24.
Well, I'm very excited about the Mets' future, so we'll have to stay tuned and hopefully hear the trumpets more in save situations at the field. I wanted to end with just a little bit more personal stuff about you, and we asked this to a lot of guests. Who's been the biggest influence so far for you in your career?
Yeah, so that question, I mean, like I mentioned, the 9 years in the minor leagues and kind of grinding it out. There was a guy by the name of Mark Fratto who currently is the public address announcer actually for the Washington Wizards and the Washington Commanders. PA address announcer for Army football too, and that sounds a little strange, but he's a former SID at St. John's who started his own production company, producing broadcasts for sports, collegiately, professionally, and he was the PA announcer at the Cyclones as well, and we connected, and he kind of brought me along to learn the tricks of the trade, the business, the working on the audio side as an A1, stage manager, TOC, and then eventually gave me my crack to do a couple games for the Westchester Knicks in the NBA G League and a couple other college assignments, and really kind of spoke on my behalf to get me places in this business. So, you need people like that. Now that I'm up in the major leagues, Howie Rose has been an incredible resource. But it's really the people, the grinders, the people that kind of lead by example, like Mark Fratto, that push me to do just as much hard work as he does.
And one final question. What's been your favorite moment thus far as a professional broadcaster?
Opening day this year, 2023 was pretty incredible, especially the home opener at Citi Field. I remember Wayne Randazzo, whose position I filled once he went to the Angels. I was kind of breaking down, hey, what do I expect? And he said something to me that it hit. He said, opening day at Citi Field, the home opener is going to be like the greatest day of your life. And to be honest, that's exactly what it was. I'd done some spring training games. Obviously, we had started on the road in Miami and Milwaukee, but once I got to Citi Field and felt the energy and the vibe of New York, it was emotional because when you're riding buses in the minor leagues for a long time, you never think you'll get there. I remember, my wife and I would talk, hey, we'll try to do this. I'm 40 years old and see where we're at and, reevaluate, try a different career. And, to get there at 29 was an incredible amount of just hard work and hope and luck and perseverance and networking. And, that 2023 opening day was like, hey, you made it. Now don't mess it up.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really great to spend time with the voice of the New York Mets and get to know you a little bit about you and to talk some Mets and some baseball. So thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Good to hear from you guys. Good to talk to you guys.
All right. Once again, Keith Raad, the New York Mets play-by-play announcer. We'll see you next time on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.